On the morning of September 10th, 2023, Elena and I woke up to a frightening call from my mom. She was out of town and said she had missed an early morning phone call from a neighbor. She checked the driveway camera to find this video, the house across the street completely engulfed in flames. We rushed over to find nothing but a smoldering pile of ashes, with nothing standing but the garage door and chimney. The immense heat buckled steel I-beams, collapsed the foundation wall, and charred or melted everything within a 30-foot radius. Thankfully, this house was currently vacant, but the destruction was still devastating to watch. If it weren't a totally calm night, this blaze could have easily ignited the barn or house barely 100 feet from it. And no one was there to stop it. Less than a month later, we had two other fire experiences way too close for comfort to our new home, and this was the final sign we needed to think much more seriously about fire protection in our build. Today's project is all about fire protection. We have decided to install a residential sprinkler system in our new build, and like many things in this project, this was not in the original plans. A couple months ago, there was a series of events, which I'm going to explain, that caused us to make this decision. It is a little bit of an additional cost now, but we feel that it's going to give us some peace of mind in the long run and protect our home from fire, whether we're here or not. In this video, I'm going to explain the decision-making process behind why we chose to go with a residential sprinkler system, the plan for the system itself, overview all the components, the parts and the pieces that I'll be using, and then start the actual mounting of the sprinklers and running of the pipe. I'll do the final hookup to the pump and the tank and the pressure test in another video. There's a little bit of a story time behind why we decided to put this system in. So let's take a step back and talk about where we're located. We are in the great state of Pennsylvania, where residential fire protection systems in new builds or major renovations is not required, except for I think maybe one or two counties right around the Philadelphia area. But however, we border the great state of Maryland, which is one of two states in the United States that requires fire protection on new construction. The other one is California. So both Maryland and California have this requirement that there be sprinklers in new houses, and we had the fortune of going over to some friends recently that had a new build in the past 5 years or so. I got to see their fire sprinkler system firsthand. Didn't really think a whole lot of it then, just like, oh, that seems kind of expensive. Like, is it really necessary? And pretty much just left it there. Didn't even think twice about it. Still wasn't part of our plan at all. Then things got a little bit interesting, because on September 10th of this year, the house directly across the street from my mom's farm, where we previously lived before we moved into the RV, spontaneously ignited at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning and completely burnt to the ground. Luckily, there was no one inside of it. The house was actually owned by an investment company. It had sat vacant for a couple of years. They picked it up to flip it, and they were about a week away from listing this back on the market for probably between $500,000 and $600,000. And it just went up in a blaze. There was no one there. No one even knew it was on fire until the flames were already through the roof, and it was completely unsalvageable. It's a total loss. The company probably lost in the order of $500,000 on this fire. They didn't have insurance that covered it. But thankfully, no lives were lost, no one was injured, it was just money. The jury's still out exactly on what caused it. Our suspicion is that the floor refinishers did it. They were refinishing all of the hardwood floors. The general contractor the next morning at the site of the fire told me that he had seen some wiring plugged directly into the electrical panel for their sanders. I don't know if they were still there or not when this ignited. I also think they might have left some oily rags in a trash can that could have spontaneously combusted. I really don't know, and the ruins were too destroyed for even the fire investigators to come to a definite conclusion. I think they ruled it as electrical or a lightning strike or something like that, but regardless, the house was a total loss, and this really made us start thinking about fire and how quickly it can become personal. And actually, one of my long-time sort of fears in the back of my mind, one of my worst fears, is being away from my house for a long period of time, for like vacation or just a trip away for the weekend, and coming back and it just being completely burned down. Like I always like look on the horizon when I'm coming back to my house to see if there's like a little smoke plume. And I don't know why I do this, but it is just this strange fear I have in the back of my head. And it really got me thinking about that. And I'm just thinking like, shoot, it might not be a bad idea before we have drywall on to put this in. Now, obviously this is not the ideal time to be doing it. We have half or so of our insulation in. Our electrical rough-in is done. Our HVAC ductwork is about halfway done, but it is not too late, and I just think it's the right time to do it if we're gonna do it. To put the cherry on top of why we decided to do this system, 2 times this fall, just after that house burned down, the fields directly adjacent to our property caught on fire. It was a good distance away from the house, but one of them I think was from a cigarette butt being thrown out the window of a passing vehicle. And then the other one was a neighboring property owner lit a bonfire too close to the edge of the field, and the wind blew the embers into the field. So those just felt like signs that we probably should think more about fire. And that ultimately was the last straw. We said we are putting one of these systems in. Now let's talk about cost, because that seems to be one of the biggest hesitations and complaints that builders have in putting these in. And of course, labor is the most expensive thing you're gonna pay for in any project. But if you can do your own labor, the materials for this I found are not that crazy expensive in the grand scheme of the project. I'll definitely do a full cost breakdown on this eventually and have a video to go along with it. But I'm thinking we'll be spending on the order of $2,000 to $3,000 in materials to put the system in. And ours is actually quite a bit more expensive than if you were on municipal water, because we're on a well. We cannot generate the pressure required with our normal well pump to satisfy the system's demands. So we actually have to install a separate 1.5 horsepower pump and a 300-gallon water tank in the utility room to feed it. Those 2 components alone are, I want to say, about $1,200 in that cost. The rest is really just piping, fittings, and the sprinklers themselves, which were like $8 each. So it really was not a big deal for the piping systems. The main expense is going to be in the pump and the tank, which of course only applies if you're on well water. Another major question I had was, do fire sprinklers actually work in protecting your property and potentially saving your life in the event of a fire? There have been a lot of studies on this, and it turns out the data shows yes, they are quite effective, and there have actually been counties that have tracked the number of fire-related injuries and deaths and property damage from before they implemented the mandate for sprinklers until after, and there have been huge differences in the data. So it is quite obvious that the sprinklers are doing something. They pretty much act as a firefighter standing in your house ready to go with a hose at any given point. And that is really important for us, especially because we are in such a rural area. It's about a 15-minute drive to the nearest fire station. By the time that they got the notice, got over here with all the equipment and started spraying, the house would probably already be unsalvageable. So that is why we really thought this system would be a good idea. Not to mention, if a fire truck ever does have to show up at your house and there is a potential that it is salvageable, they're blasting 300 gallon a minute of water through one of your windows to try to put the fire out, probably cutting a hole in your roof to get in and really causing a lot of other damage that you are gonna have to deal with. Whereas the sprinklers that we chose put out 13 gallon a minute. The tank only's got 300 gallons of water in it, and usually only 1 sprinkler, maybe 2, will go off in one given fire event. That's what the statistics have shown. So I would much rather come home to, a flooded house in the event of a fire while we're not home than either a burned down house, or B, have to call the fire department and have them come totally destroy the house with water, which basically defeats the purpose of saving the house anyway if it's totally ruined with high pressure water. Now let's dig into the details of how we're actually going to install this system. I'll be honest, I have no prior experience or knowledge of fire protection systems. This was a pretty big learning curve for me. I did quite a bit of reading and watching videos on this. NFPA 13D is the residential fire code in the US. I read that cover to cover, and I even reached out to a local sprinkler installer in Maryland to clear up some last questions that I had. So shout out to Fire Tech for that, thank you. But I feel like I've learned enough now to install our system. The main educational tool I used was that NFPA 13D. I will hand it to the writers of that code. It is very, very easy to digest. They even have this enhanced content, which breaks down the code jargon into a much more understandable layman's term version of it right next to it. It's a much easier and shorter read than the International Residential Code, which I've also read a lot of. And I think they've done that so that the adoption of fire protection systems becomes more widespread. If any builder or plumber can read the code and actually understand it with easy to follow diagrams, it's a much higher chance that it's actually going to get installed in a build. Let's talk about system components. I will be using 1-inch PEX for all of my piping. This is actually not the industry standard. Typically, residential sprinkler systems use this BlazeMaster orange CPVC that is got a slightly thicker wall than traditional CPVC, and they say it's rated for fire or whatever. But I actually have trust issues with CPVC. A very small crack in a CPVC pipe ruined half of my mom's kitchen about 5 years ago, and that was all the deterrent I needed to not put really any CPVC in this house that I can't see or access to easily change when it gets brittle over time. Additionally, some of this piping will be in our ceiling joists. I'm going to bury it under insulation, but if there is any risk at all of freezing, I did not want to put CPVC in there. There's going to be water in those pipes. PEX is much more burst resistant, and I feel it's going to be a much more durable option over time. Here's what our standard sprinkler drops are going to look like. These are all 1-inch fittings, 1-inch adapter to 1-inch PEX, and then I have a reducer bushing 1 to a 1/2 inch. The sprinklers themselves are from Viking. That's the Viking VK494. This covers a 16 by 16 area, and this is a flat plate concealed sprinkler. So you don't actually see any sprinkler head, not the traditional head you think of anyway. All you see on the ceiling is this flat white metal plate. It's arranged like this, where the sprinkler is basically flush with the drywall. I'm gonna pull this protective red cap out of here. So this is why they call these a concealed sprinkler. The little deflector that sprays the water everywhere actually telescopes up into the sprinkler and is flat with the ceiling. And so that's what allows this plate to go on. And in the event of a fire, this plate will drop off at 139 degrees. I think there's like a heat calibrated solder that holds the plate on. This pennant will drop down, and then at 155 degrees, there is a glass bulb up in the sprinkler that will rupture. It basically boils, breaks the glass, ruptures, and lets the flow of water start coming out the sprinkler. The jet of water comes down, hits the deflector, and is sprayed in a very wide pattern. These residential sprinklers spray in a very flat, wide pattern to cover as much as possible. They are a little bit different than the traditional pendant sprinklers, so you just need to keep that in mind when you're mounting them near obstructions. There's some rules and some tables I'll talk about a little later about this. So the elbow is what I'll use if the sprinkler is at the end of the run, and then basically the same thing if the sprinkler is in the middle of the run. This is just a T with the 1/2 inch reducer. There's some specialty tools as well. This is the socket wrench. This is just a plastic socket wrench that I was able to get from the supplier. This is what goes up into the sprinkler. It interlocks with the little recesses that are cut out of the back of the sprinkler for airflow, and then this is what you use to actually twist the sprinkler on and tighten it for a leak tight seal. The other specialty tool is the cover plate installer. So this little guy clips onto the cover plate, and this is what you use to, I guess, do the final push and twist of the plate onto the sprinkler when you're finally done. Finally, these red protective caps make sure the sprinkler head or glass bulb doesn't get damaged through drywall or paint. To hold all the piping to the framing, I'm using these tube talon clamps. I picked up 3 bags of those. I have regular 1-inch PEX T's and elbows to make all the different transitions. And then I got these pipe straps. These are 1-inch and they're actually too small. I got 1 1/4 on the way. These are to hold the elbows solidly onto framing so that I can twist the sprinklers on and off. And in the future, if God forbid one of these ever has to activate, I can replace it with a new sprinkler without any movement of the fitting the sprinkler is screwing into. Of course, my PEX crimper did not have a 1-inch option, so I had to get a new 1-inch PEX crimper, and I'm using the copper rings. These are 1-inch copper rings. I like the copper rings the most out of all the different PEX fastening options. I just think it looks professional and will last a long time. I don't doubt the little spring clamps, but I just like the rings better. The first step for install is pre-assembling all of my bushings and PEX adapters into my elbows and T's. I think I need to do like 7 or 8 T's and like 12 of these elbows. I'll use Teflon tape and pipe dope on each threaded connection. I found that gives a really good leak-free seal. And I'm just gonna montage through this because this is pretty boring. God bless We are finally down to the very last one. Oh my gosh. 19 sprinklers in this system total. And I ran out of Teflon tape, so I had to go get more of that. And I found when I was looking at the different options at Home Depot where I got this, that the little white rolls of Teflon tape that you think are a good deal at like 50 cents or 99 cents each are actually a total ripoff, because you're only getting, in most cases, either 260 or 512 inches or 520 inches, which is, what is that, 20 feet or 40 feet? And that's $1. But for $3, this Blue Monster tape, which is a higher quality tape, in my opinion, I use their pipe dope, you get 1,429 inches. I did the math on that quick, and it's like roughly half the cost for the bigger roll of Blue Monster tape versus the generic white PTFE tape. So just keep that in mind. I like to use both the tape and the pipe dope just as an extra layer of leak protection. I can't say that I've ever had a joint leak with both of these on. I have had joints leak with just the Teflon tape, and honestly I haven't tried many with just the pipe dope. After I started putting the dope on top of the tape, I haven't really done anything else. They say that just one of the two is adequate, but I think both together is even better. And here's a trick on the tape wrapping, because I always forget which way to wrap it. This is how I remember it. Maybe this will help someone else remember it. I try to like stab myself with the fitting. I guess that's a little bit morbid. I point the fitting at me, the threaded end of the fitting, and then I wrap clockwise. And when that breaks off, that should be the right direction to that when you turn the fitting, it does not unwrap the tape. That's just how I remember it. If you have any other better ways to think about that, please leave them in the comments. This Craig table and automatic clamp has been pretty handy for fastening all these together, but it does not hold them for the final tighten. For that, I've been using a pipe wrench, but for just the beginning parts, it's really easy to clamp this thing down and get the first, I don't know, 80% of the turns on there. I say that as it starts swiveling all over the place. The previous 14 or 13 were pretty easy. I'm not afraid to go too snug on the bushings, because I definitely do not want one of these leaking. And if I ever have to back one of these sprinklers out in the future, I don't want it unscrewing the bushing too. There she is, that's the last one. With all those fittings finally assembled, I can finally start putting everything up in the ceiling where it belongs. The locating task of all of these and the layout was definitely a little bit of a challenge. I had to read quite a bit of code to understand all of the obstruction rules and how far things needed to be away from walls. So of course I broke out good old-fashioned chief architect, did all the layout in there. I was able to use boxes to represent the 16 by 16 spray coverage of each sprinkler and sort of overlay the box on the sprinkler head location to make sure that all of the floor area would be covered. One important thing to remember when laying these out is there is a minimum distance between sprinkler heads. You can't have just a ton of these things, because if one goes off, it can potentially cool the one next to it if the spray is too close, especially with these residential sprinklers that have a very flat spray pattern. So one sprinkler might potentially cause another one from not going off if hot air can't get to that sprinkler because it's being cooled by an adjacent sprinkler. In my case, 8 foot or half the 16-foot area coverage is the minimum distance, so they must be at least 8 feet apart. With all of these rules, the system sort of lays itself out. Once you factor in the distances from the walls, distances from each other, distance from light fixtures, the general case is 3 foot from the center of a light fixture or a fan, and any bar light fixture like I'll have down here in my garage, it depends on the depth of the thing. Ours are about 3 inches deep. So following the table for a beam obstruction, it's like 3 feet, I think, away, between 2 and 3 feet. So in short, there's really not that many different places that they can go. We'll have 6 here in the front garage, 2 in the back garage, 1 in the utility room, 1 in the kitchen, living, and dining area, 1 in the hall, 1 in each bedroom, 1 in the bathroom, 1 in the laundry closet, and 1 in the main bedroom closet. That comes out to 19 sprinklers total. It's quite a few, but that also includes all of this garage space, which you technically do not need to put sprinklers in by code. However, in our situation, all of our living space is above the garage. So if there were ever a fire in the garage, it would make a lot of sense to have a sprinkler down here as well. We're already going through with it, so I figured what's another, 10 sprinklers to the system. Something else I wanted to bring up, which is kind of specific to our build, which is very focused on air sealing, is that these sprinklers do have an air gap underneath that cover plate, and they're meant to have that so that hot air can get up and in and trigger the drop mechanism and the sprinkler itself. However, when you're trying to maintain a really airtight ceiling, this presents a problem because the sprinkler is a direct air path from the enclosed living area to the ventilated attic, which is basically a direct path for heat and energy to be lost. So I'm getting a little bit creative with this, but I'm trying to maintain a continuous air barrier on that ceiling. We're actually going to be using Siga Myrex as a secondary air control layer and a vapor control layer above our drywall. And I want to make sure that it's continuous with these sprinklers as well. I don't want 10 or 12 different holes in both my garage and upstairs ceilings, which are supposed to be a solid air barrier because of these sprinklers. I want to have the sprinklers, but I also want to have the air sealing. So this is what I'm doing about it. Introducing prototype V probably 4. I did some playing around with just some zip and some 2x material, and I'm going to build little airtight boxes around these guys. I've used Lexel to seal the edges, and this is just held together with finish nails. It didn't need to be super sturdy or anything, but this little unit here is how I think I'm going to assemble everything on the bench and then screw through the zip into my joist where I need to. After I get all the piping hooked up and do the pressure test and make sure that nothing's leaking, then I'll come back and put the cover plate on, and I will have a recessed box essentially that I can take my Siga Myrex air barrier and fold it down in here and tape it right along this. I'll use Lexel or Big Stretch or something to seal the space around the hole where the pipe comes through. And that should be a pretty darn well air sealed box, but still allow air to get to the sprinkler so that it works properly. Not gonna lie, this took a good bit of thinking about and trial and error to get all the dimensions right. A lot of the thought came in the positioning of the edge of the sprinkler relative to the ceiling. There's only about a ½ inch of tolerance there. It cannot hang any lower than the plane of the ceiling, the finished drywall for sure, and it can't be any further above than a ½ inch of that finished plane. So I needed to account for the engagement depth of this bushing in here, the sprinkler into the bushing, and then position this correctly in this box. I needed to also make sure I had tool access so I could get my PEX crimper in here. I also needed to put this 1x spacer in here because the sprinkler head is wider than my T. So I could not just fasten the T to the zip. The sprinkler would be at an angle and would be stressed in that case and could not rotate freely. Maybe I'm crazy for caring this much about air sealing, but I figure we're only here once. We can only do this correctly once, so I might as well try. It's really nothing but my time. This is all scrap material that we're using. I kept all of our scrap zip cutoffs from when we did the framing of this house. And so it really isn't costing me anything to do this. It's just the time and effort. But if there's anything that you've learned from watching this build is we will take the extra time needed to try to make things as right as we possibly can. This is a house that we plan to live in for quite a while, of course, before we do the addition anyway. And we don't want to cover up anything with drywall that we can't come back and fix and make it right. As the saying goes, do it right the first time. So now that the design has been finalized, we just need to batch cut a whole bunch of these pieces. We need to make 18 of these boxes. The one in the laundry closet does not need to be air sealed. And of course, I moved the table saw outside to take care of the dust situation. But today happens to be December 21st, AKA the shortest and darkest day of the year. And it is now getting dark at like 4:30 p.m. Well, I just had a bright idea, and that was to put the spotlight out the deck door looking down onto the table saw. This is perfect. Makeshift floodlight. Just like that, we have all of our pieces to our boxes cut. I ripped everything on the table saw. Lena was a big help. She helped cut everything on the miter saw to length. And now we just have to assemble them all. Before getting too far ahead of ourselves though, I wanted to check this would work. So I hung my sample up in one of the garage locations. I batch cut a bunch of 5/4 boards. To act as the spacer to get it off the I-joist flange, and this seems to be so far so good. Here's a piece of 1x, which is about the same thickness as 5/8 drywall. When you put that up there, you'll see the metal is just slightly recessed beneath the ceiling, and that is exactly what we want. I cut a jig out of scrap to mark the center hole locations, then drilled out each block with an 1.5 inch diameter hole saw. I've assembled a couple of these off camera now, and I feel like I got the hang of it, so let's walk through one. The instructions for these sprinklers specifically call out not using both tape and dope. It says just tape or dope, and so I'm gonna choose dope. I think that works a little bit better in the grand scheme of things than the tape, considering I said I've experienced leaks from tape only. So I'm just gonna put a little bit on here all the way around. Being careful not to get it in the orifice of the sprinkler. Now, the manual calls out 14 foot-pounds to tighten these two, and I'm sure, professional sprinkler installers can just do this by hand, and, they just know what's tight enough or too tight. Well, I don't, because I've never tightened these before. So I got my actual automotive grade click style torque wrench, and that is what I'm using to tighten these things so that I know they're all right at 14 foot-pounds where they're supposed to be. Here's my click, right at 14 pounds. I can put the cover back. Got my 5 components laid out here, back, top, sides, and spacer. I'm gonna throw a little bit of Lexel on the back of this guy just to help keep it in place while I screw it in, help keep it positioned. And I've sized this so that lining the top edge of this spacer up with the top of my panel should put the bottom edge right at the right spot. I did notice that if I don't get these perfectly squared up and straight, there is some play in the housing of the sprinkler head itself, just to make sure that it's totally flat and flush with the ceiling. These aren't super, super rigid, which is kind of nice. Sanity check my sides here. It's looking pretty good. I'm just using these general 1 5/8" screws through my pipe straps to hold this down. It just so happens it's the perfect length to not come through the back of the zip. This is probably the spot where I'm taking the most care, just to keep everything nice and perpendicular with each other so that the sprinkler is going to be hanging plumb. Also, to not split these 1-bys, I'm using a screw to basically drill a hole as I go. Especially important right down at the edge of this. I didn't have any 3/4 inch plywood, but I probably would have used that if I did, just to keep from splitting. That was the hard part. Now we just got to seal the box up. So I'm using a good fat bead of Lexel as both a glue and a sealant. That's going to hold everything in place while I put a couple finish nails in to hold it while it cures. But it's pretty impressive how well that grabs in a very short amount of time. Just a couple 16 gauge, 2.5 inch long nails is all I'm going to use. Actually, they might be 2 inches. Can't remember. I'll keep everything nice and snug as the Lexel cures. Same deal for this top panel. Perfect. Beautiful little bead of squeeze out there. That will be a nice sealed box when it's all done. I'm finally getting down to the last few boxes to assemble, and it's kind of funny. This is like 4 days before Christmas now, and I feel like I am an elf in Santa's toy shop assembling these toys. I just have such a collection going. This is what I'm talking about. These new Christmas toys are all the latest rage, and they're even red and green themed for Christmas. Hanging in the stockings, coming down the stair baluster, and everything. So if Santa brought you one of these nice sprinkler toys this past Christmas, you can thank this elf here. This Craig table has really gotten some use on this project. This is my favorite part of the whole process, tightening the sprinkler into the fitting. Don't really know why. I think it's the satisfaction of hearing the torque wrench click. There's just something very fulfilling about it. It feels like I'm like assembling an engine or something. It's taking me back to some of my mechanical roots. If you're somewhat new to the channel, I actually have some videos way back in the archive that are like mechanic focused, rebuilding the engine in my Honda Civic and doing some brake work and stuff, rebuilding a lawnmower engine. Those were the good old days, and I still do enjoy that kind of stuff from time to time, but the house build has basically overtaken all of my project brain space. Found the best way to fasten these elbows is just a single strap right over the elbow itself. You can get away with just 2 screws, and it's quite sturdy. I did start pre-drilling. I got smart, and this saves me a little bit of time. It's just easier in general. Nice and snug. And when I mount this, I'm going to put 1 long screw right through the middle of this, just as some extra insurance that this block will never separate from the zip. These 2 screws are just barely long enough to get some engagement into the zip. That's also why I'm putting the Lexel on the back for some extra holding power, but I think just 1 long screw when I mount this into the joist will do the trick. The toys are now all fully assembled, and we can begin mounting them on the ceiling. In theory, this should be the easy part. I've done one so far and it was pretty easy, so in theory all the rest should be pretty easy too, but that is never how anything in theory ever goes, it seems. You may be wondering why the floor platform is like partially insulated, and it's because the Rockwell guys came to do some filming. We wanted to get some insulation in, so we did the exterior walls. And the parts of the floor platform that we did not need to access again, we did not have all of our HVAC ductwork in though, so we left certain parts out where I knew there was going to be a duct run, and we did all the rest. But when we were originally putting this in, we thought it might be good to keep the bats low in the floor platform. We've changed our minds since and think that the heat will be better retained upstairs and keep our feet warmer with the insulation bats right up against that floor platform, and then we'll fill in at the bottom with any extra we have, like even offcuts we're gonna pack in here. That actually works out all right because I gotta either remove or push this up anyway. So I'm just gonna push these bats up for the time being. Oh, there's a dryer duct under this one. It's my vent pipe. I forgot there's a vent pipe in there, so I can't push that one up. I'm gonna have to put the sprinkler 1 bay over and probably, yeah, I have that one too close. Probably on this side. That'll be pretty darn close. So that's what I'm doing where I need to put sprinklers. I'm just pushing this up and we'll be good to go. Once I get the floor cleared out, I'll go around and push all the rest of it up. But for now, I'm just pushing it up where I need to. Cordless drills are so underrated. I feel like since Impacts came out, that's what everyone wants to use, and I do love my Impact, but cordless drills still do a really nice job. I used to remember them as just stripping screws like nothing, but with a good star bit screw, modern drill does just fine. I say that and then it pops out on me on the next go. Okay. With each one I'm putting up, I'm doing sort of a sanity check on the height and using this 5/8 thick board. It represents my drywall. The spec is the top of the nipple of the sprinkler cannot be less than 2 inches or more than 2.5 inches above the plane of the drywall. And when I take that out, I just measure to the top of the sprinkler. It's got to be between 1 3/8 and 1 7/8 from the top of the surface. In general, mine are closer to the top end of that because I didn't want them potentially hanging too low. This one is right there. I might have to sink this down just a little bit. The deflector can only drop so far, so if it's too far up in the ceiling, not only will your cover plate not be able to engage with these threads, but when the deflector drops down, in the case this ever activates, the deflector is way up in the ceiling, all of your water is going to stay up in the ceiling, it's not going to spray out. So it's important to follow their direction for how far this has got to sit relative to the ceiling plane. Well, I just realized that I just made about a $150 mistake, and one that's going to cost me some time and labor to correct as well. I was just kind of glancing at this little spare sprinkler here, I don't know. I don't even know why I was looking at it in more depth, and I realized on the bottom of the sprinkler, there's a stamping that has all of the, the listing qualifications and the temperature rating of the sprinkler. I noticed a little 200F on the end, and I was like, 200, I thought these were supposed to be 155. And then I got looking into it a little bit more, and the bulb on the inside is actually green, not red. And I thought they were red, but it's kind of shaded in there. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what the color is. And so I looked back at the quote and I realized that I bought all intermediate temperature sprinklers. They pop at 200 Fahrenheit, not 155. Code does say that these intermediate temps should be used in garage areas or spaces that might hit 135 Fahrenheit on, I guess, a somewhat consistent basis. But frankly, this insulated garage is not ever going to hit that at the ceiling, even on a hot summer day with the doors open. And all of the ones upstairs need to be ordinary temp sprinklers because that's definitely not going to hit that type of temperature up there. So all of these sprinklers I basically won't be able to use. I have to go buy a whole nother set of 20 ordinary temperature sprinklers. I did email the company that I bought these from, and they said they could give me an okay deal on it. This was mostly my fault, but the person that I gave the order to over the phone didn't ask actually for ordinary versus intermediate. I assume they would have assumed they would be ordinary, but you know what happens when you assume. So I got all intermediate temps, and now I have to go buy all new ordinary temps. Now to take them all out of their housings. The one silver lining of this, I will say, actually there's two. First, taking them out, I realized that some of my clamps were kind of loose, so I'm tightening them up as I go, so it'll be a little bit more secure when it comes time to actually put the pipe in. And Lord forbid I ever have to change one. I don't want this thing coming loose when it's up in the ceiling and I can no longer access it. Secondly, when I was mounting these ones down in the garage, they were hanging a little bit higher than I originally planned. I didn't think that was going to be an issue, but then I started thinking about if that deflector drops down and it can't get below the ceiling far enough, well, then it doesn't do a whole lot of good if it's all up in the ceiling. So I was within tolerance, but it was on the high end of the tolerance. I'm going to trim down a 1/4 inch off the bottom edge of my boxes just to let it sit just maybe about 3/16, 1/4 inch or so above the plane of the ceiling, rather than like the 7/16 or 1/2 inch where it was. So there's always some kind of silver lining, even though if it's a little bit more work now. And the representative at Viking who sold the sprinklers kind of understood the situation. He gave me a good deal on a set of new ones, and they will also ship them for free out here. So it's just a few more days of waiting. I'll have to work on something else in the meantime. I think I might still be able to put the boxes up, get the piping in, and then just assemble the sprinklers and torque them up in the ceiling. We'll see. That's going to be a game time decision, I think. This feels like a good place to end part 1 of the 3-part sprinkler series. On the next video, we'll get all these boxes mounted, connect all the PEX tubing, and conduct a pressure test. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.